Good morning and welcome. It is my delight and honor to get to introduce Nick Hutchison, who will be presenting our workshop on Shakespeare from page to stage. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about Cana Academy, who is the Renaissance sponsor for this presentation. Cana Academy is an academy for humanities teachers. They host two websites, canaacademy.org and history250.org. The Cana Academy site is dedicated to serving teachers who want to develop great discussions for great texts. Personal plug, I use Cana Academy a lot whenever I need to lead a seminar. I love using their seminar resources, are extremely helpful. So a little about Nick. Nick is a director, actor, and lecturer on Shakespeare. He is directed at the Sam Wanamaker Theater, Wilton's Music Hall, and St. James Theater, at the Aldeburgh Jubilee Hall, at Folger Theater in Washington, D.C., the McCoy Theater in Memphis, and at the American Shakespeare Theater in Virginia. He's an associate tutor at RADA, LAMDA, and Shakespeare's Globe, and he has directed and taught for the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, the Lir Academy in Dublin, BADA, Mountain View, Rhodes College, Syracuse, Notre Dame, Case Western Reserve University, and NYU. As an actor, he has worked with the RSC, the National Theater, the Globe Theater, on the BBC and ITV, and appeared in Miss Potter, 102 Dalmatians, and as John in About a Boy. He lectures worldwide on Shakespeare, had a paper published in Shakespeare Bulletin in 2014, and contributed to How and Why We Teach Shakespeare and Why the Theater. It is an honor to get to introduce you. Thank you for joining us today.
2014, having an article published in Shakespeare Bulletin sounds a terribly long time ago now, doesn't it? It sounds like I've been slacking for the last 11 years. What I want to do today, and some familiar faces from Wednesday when Jonathan Bate and I were in here doing a session on textual variations in Shakespeare. And Jonathan touched on, annoyingly, some of the stuff that I'm going to be doing this morning, which is thinking about how they did the plays then, because one of the things that keeps coming up in sessions like this, teachers asking, how do you get young people involved in Shakespeare? How do you teach it so that it's not some sort of sterile, antiquated, sort of old-fashioned thing, but actually alive and doing it? And Jonathan was saying, get them up and doing it, and get them, reading it, acting it out. Don't make it about literature, making it about theatre. And I think what I'm going to talk about this morning is a really good way of doing that, because I was never taught this. When I read, drama at university, did drama all my life, and no one ever talked about really how Shakespeare did Shakespeare. And I suppose everything you were saying very nicely about all the places where I teach, one of the things I try and do with Shakespeare is demystify it. Because you see kids at the Globe, sort of 6 and 7 year olds on stage at the Globe, and they're charging around, biting their thumbs at each other and shouting, "Tibbot, you rat catcher, will you walk?" And they're having a whale of a time because no one's told them it's difficult. And you know that someone's going to get them into a classroom and say the dread words iambic pentameter to them, and you lost them for life. And it's a real shame, because important though the iambic pentameter is, there's more to Shakespeare than that. A lot of it, I think, comes down to understanding how they worked. And Jonathan touched on this, but it's what I'm more and more convinced. It's very hard to understand Shakespeare until you understand the way the actors worked in the 1590s, 1600s. Because it's very different to now. I mean, modern actors, we do television and film, and fairly clearly they didn't, for reasons I hope I don't have to explain. But we sort of have this assumption that theatre is theatre, and that we do theatre and they did theatre, and it works the same, and it really doesn't. And the difference, I think, is what makes it interesting. So what I want to talk about this morning, and those of you here on Wednesday will know the full horror of this, get you doing, because this is not just me talking, is thinking about the way they did it. Not because I believe that we should perform the way they did. I'm not a Luddite about this. I love lights and I love set. and I like, recorded sound and all the rest of it. So I don't think that we need to work this way, though it can actually be quite interesting as an exercise. But what it does do is show you why Shakespeare writes the way Shakespeare writes, and what he's trying to do with the way he writes. So I want to start. I'm going to assume, for the sake of argument, that you're fantastically qualified teachers. You know the story of Romeo and Juliet, and it's an easy one to talk about because it's the one they do in Shakespeare in Love, and we've all seen Leonardo DiCaprio do it, etc., etc. And it's probably taught more than any other play, I would have thought, by Shakespeare. If we're doing it now, in 2025, there's a production just about to open in London in the West End, and there's another production just about to open at the RSC in Stratford, where Shakespeare was born. And it works the same in the States. As you said, I've worked at the Folger, and it's pretty similar there, in the American Shakespeare Center in Virginia. You start by casting it, fairly obviously, and you decide who's playing what. You go through a process of rehearsal. If you're lucky, you get previews. If you're not, you just get the play on, and it runs for as long as it runs, if it's a set limited run, or it runs until the audience stop coming if it's not. And that's pretty standard. And for a modern production, how long do we rehearse for? How long do you think you get, production at somewhere like the Folger? How long do you think the rehearsal period is? A couple of months, second? A few weeks, yeah. The Folger, I think it's still the same. It used to be 4.5 weeks at the Folger, which is fine. It's tight. You can do it. It's tight. If you work for a bigger company in England like the RSC, you probably get 7 or 8 weeks to rehearse your Shakespeare, which is fine, but that's partly because your actors are doing other plays in the afternoons. If you work in Germany, we had a company called the Bremer Shakespeare Company. It used to come to the Globe a lot. The Bremer gets 6 months to rehearse a Shakespeare play. They were up in arms because their rehearsal period for As You Like It was cut from 6 months to 5, and they didn't think they'd get the play on in time. God knows what you do for 5 months in rehearsal. Get found out, I would have thought, but still. It begs the most obvious question, which is, why don't we get longer? Why do you keep rehearsal short? Because the play's the thing, yeah, and? Yes, money. Exactly right. While you're rehearsing, you're paying a director, you're paying a group of actors, you've got no income. You're therefore losing money. Get the play on, you send the director home, and hopefully you start making cash. Germany has phenomenal state subsidy for the arts. So whatever it is they do for 6 months, basically the government are paying. In this country, my country, and I fear in yours, art is a form of swear word. We don't get that level of subsidy. So you keep rehearsal short, you get the play on quicker. And really, from your point of view, as mostly teachers, I suspect, this is almost the most important thing. Show business is obviously a business. And I spend a lot of time talking to drama students about this. The idea of, starving for your art is interesting for sort of 4 or 5 days. And then eating becomes fairly significant as well. And you're in the business to make money. People are trying to make money out of this, and it's tough. If you take away nothing else from my talk this morning, take away this: show business is a business in Shakespeare's time. However much you're going to read writers who are going to try and tell you he's this sort of saintly, otherworldly figure writing 36 plays for the greater glory of humanity, it's not true. He's writing because it's his job to write plays, but it's one of his jobs, and I'll discuss the other two in a minute. And it's a really interesting idea, because we have, I don't know if you have the same thing over here, I think you do, but in the UK we have an absolute idea of how Elizabethan theatre works, I think based largely on things like Shakespeare in Love. So if you're a writer or an actor in Elizabethan theatre, how much money do you make, do you reckon? Are you rich, are you poor? What do you think? Rich, poor? Which way are we jumping? Middle? Very good. Sitting safely on the fence. The general consensus, I think, certainly in the UK, is that they're starving artists, toiling away in some freezing garret, trying to put bread in the mouth of their hungry babies. And it's sort of promulgated by the Romantics in the 19th century, this idea of sort of lonely, tortured artist. And Shakespeare in Love certainly has that idea that, Joseph Fiennes is scribbling away in his little garret with my favourite joke, a souvenir mug from Stratford-on-Avon on the table in front of him, which is just a brilliantly meta-theatrical gag. It's not true. If you do well in Elizabethan theatre, and note the proviso, but if you do well, it's Hollywood. It's that sort of money. You're making fortunes. And I'll give you two examples of this, because no one ever believes me. There's an actor at the Rose Theatre, a rival theatre to the Globe, predecessor of the Globe and a rival theatre to the Globe. And the leading actor is a guy called Ned Allen, Edward Alleyne. And Ned Allen is the first superstar of Elizabethan theatre. He's the first Dr. Faustus that Jonathan was talking about yesterday. And he's sort of, I don't know, Mark Rylance, Johnny Depp, and you name your favourite, Tom Hiddleston rolled into one, if you like. He's huge. In 1599, he retires from acting, and largely, I think, because he notices there's a big theatre being built right on his doorstep that's going to be better, called the Globe. And to make his peace with God for being an actor, he founds a college in southeast London for the children of the poor called Allains. Still exists today, no longer for the children of the poor, one of the most expensive schools in London. But he founds it in 1599 on a grant of £10,000. So that's what now, about $13,000. I don't know about your backgrounds, but I would be very happy to receive cheques made out in my name as we leave today, if that doesn't seem a significant amount of money to you. I think that's quite a lot of cash now. In 1599, there are different ways of working out what money's worth. But in 1599, that's somewhere between £2.5 and £3 million. And that's a stage actor who has that to give away. Actually, he doesn't, because he has to make more comebacks than Sinatra to keep paying for this thing. But he's got the initial cash to start with. That's a heck of a lot of money. Shakespeare, of course, is a writer for, an actor in, and most importantly, a shareholder of the most successful theatre company at that point operating on the planet. He makes a fortune. If you go to Stratford, you can see the gardens of the house he buys in 1595. He buys the second biggest house in Stratford, a prosperous market town. It's not big enough. So he buys another property the other side of Chapel Lane. Well, he's only got 2 kids by then because Hamlet's dead. So it's presumably for servants. He buys a lot of land outside Stratford to farm. He buys the profits on the 3 parishes with the land taxes round about Stratford. He buys a substantial property in central London so he can be near his theatre world. And he buys a title for his family. And I love this because 4 years ago when I came here, you had to say that we think he buys a title, because we know the family gets bought a title, but there was no proof that it was Shakespeare that bought it. Someone's going through some legal documents in London, finds a legal document that points out that the title is bought by Shakespeare the player. So we now know that it was him who bought it. So he's a wealthy, wealthy guy. And he writes good plays. I think he deserves everything he gets. So they're trying to make money. They've got this big open-air theatre. And if any of you have been to the Globe, I just love it in London. It just cracks me up. If you want ever proof that it's about cash and not about art, look where they built the Globe. So the Rose Theatre, can you come be the Rose Theatre for a moment, if you wouldn't mind? Can you just stand there? So the Rose Theatre is here, and it's been here for 12 years, and it's fantastically successful. And the South Bank is very underdeveloped. So Shakespeare is moving his company from the North Bank, from the northeast of London, area of Shoreditch, to the lease around on the land. So they're going to build something somewhere on the South Bank. And the whole South Bank is this room, right? So I can build my theatre anywhere I like. There's just one theatre operating in the area called the Rose that's been there for 12 years, doing very nicely. Thank you. So obviously I've got the whole of this room in which I can build my theatre. They build it there. I mean, it's an act of naked corporate aggression. And the Rose sadly closes down within about 5 years. So good. So they're trying to make money, and they're doing very well, and they're making a lot of cash. So how long does Shakespeare's company rehearse a new play for? This is the big deal, I think. You've got a new play called Romeo and Juliet. It's 1595, so it's not written for the Globe because it's not built till 1599. So they're performing, as I said, at a theatre in northeast London called rather brilliantly The Theatre. How long does Shakespeare's company rehearse a Shakespeare play for? 3 days. 3 days? Cool, how the heck do you do it in 3 days? The answer is you don't, because that would be ridiculous, 3 days. Far too long. No, they perform in the afternoons at 2 o'clock because these are outdoor theatres with no lights. If you perform at night, no one sees anything. Every afternoon at 2 o'clock, you do a different play. If you do a different play every afternoon, when do you rehearse? In the morning. Why do you do a different play every afternoon? Very good. You're getting the hang of this now. Just shout money every time. Yeah, no, 99% hit rate. Yeah, money. The Globe took 3,000 people. London in 1600 is a city of fewer than 200,000 people. If you do 2 weeks of Romeo and Juliet, by the end of week 1, everybody in London knows that everybody's dead at the end. And you're performing to 2 people and a dog, and you'll go broke. So you've got to get the same audience coming back. And we know this from The Rose, which is run by a guy called Philip Henslow, Geoffrey Rush, for those of you who've seen Shakespeare enough. And Henslow keeps what we call a diary. It's not actually a diary, but it's a list of what plays they do on any given and how much they take at the box office. It doesn't bother to tell you who wrote them because who cares, but it tells you how much they did, how well they did at the box office. And obviously I've chosen the most extreme example I can find. But in one 6-month period in the mid-1590s, the Admiral's Men, the theatre company working at the Rose, in 6 months, perform 48 different plays. Of that 48, 28, that's over half, are new plays. They've never been done before. In the 1590s, they never do the same play twice in a week. That changes in the 1600s. But in the 1590s, they never do the same play twice in a week because you've got to get the same audience coming back. And if you have a huge hit on your hands, they do a production of Henry V, not Shakespeare's. And it's enormously successful. Any play in England about beating hell out of the French is always going to do very well at the English box office. And it breaks all box office records at the Rose. So successful is it that in the first 18 months, they perform it 12 times. That's once every 6 weeks, according to my math. There are other plays they do once and then they never do again. It means, basically, you get a few days to learn your lines and the morning to rehearse. That's it, because you've got to get the same audience coming back. So you've got the morning to rehearse, you've got a theatre with no lights. So what time are you going to start? Sunrise, dawn. Yeah, absolutely. They're actors. Actors don't do dawn. Unless they're seeing it from the other way, from the other side. Now, a ridiculous idea that you'd start at dawn, you have to get up early. No, they start, as we start in the UK, they start at 10. So that gives you from 10 till 2 to rehearse your Shakespeare play. But they're actors. What have I forgotten? Nearly. The other thing really important to actors. Lunch. Exactly, food. Old habits die hard. You just watch a group of actors, the croissant come out like out there, and the actors just it's like flies. Food, free food. Yeah, they break for lunch at 1. So you break for lunch at 1, the show's at 2, you start at 10, that gives you 3 hours to rehearse a Shakespeare play. How long are most Shakespeare plays? If you're lucky. Yeah, I mean, most of them are 3 hours long, really. So you've got 3 hours to rehearse a 3-hour play. If you think about Romeo and Juliet, the scene where they meet's a masked ball. All the men are wearing face masks and everybody's dancing. I would have thought you have to rehearse that, because if you don't, the dance is going to fall apart. The wrong people are going to talk to the wrong people, dance with the wrong people, so they'll fall in love with the wrong people. And you wind up with a tragedy called Romeo and Lady Capulet, and you have a disaster on your hands. Add to that, you have 6 sword fight scenes, 2 of which are crowd sword fight scenes. Well, I don't want to share a stage with 16 other heavily armed people who don't know what they're doing. So you're going to rehearse those fights. So you're going to rehearse a masked ball and 6 or 5, 6 sword fights in 3 hours. You're not going to rehearse much, if any, of the rest of the play. And Shakespeare knows this. He knows how it works. He's an actor in the company. So he's writing these plays to be performed with almost no rehearsal. So what I want to think about this morning is how on earth do you do that? Because to us, it's just utterly, utterly terrifying as a concept, I think. Except that as a modern actor, we think about that and you think, oh my God, that's terrifying, couldn't do that. And then you go off and do a movie. You don't rehearse movies. You do camera rehearsal, but very rarely do you rehearse a film. As you said very kindly in my introduction, I was in a movie called About a Boy. And Hugh Grant insisted that the principals, we had a day's rehearsal on it, where we sat around and talked about character. And Toni Collette's in it. And Toni Collette, Muriel's Wedding and Sixth Sense actress, who's just a god. and she's a blunt Australian lady. And at lunchtime, she went, "Are we going to do this all day? Are we just going to sit around and talk about character all day?" And the director went, "Yeah, absolutely, that's what we're going to do." She went, "Great." And she went off to the pub at lunchtime and we never saw her again. That was it. I don't need to do that. You just point me in the direction of a camera, I'll do it. So we do it in film, they did it in theatre. So how do you do that? And what does it tell you about Shakespeare? But before we get to that, something Jonathan mentioned on Wednesday, we have to think about is how you learn your lines. Because I'm going back to the UK to do a production of Antony Cleopatra, which I'm currently trying to cut from the 3.5 hours it runs to 1 hour and 40. Goodbye subplots. And what I'll do is I'll do it on my computer and we'll print it off, and the actors will get given a computer printout, which obviously they don't have in the 1590s. As Jonathan said, they have printing, and half of the plays are printed in Shakespeare's life, what we call the quartos, as he said, to fold in 4, piece of paper folded in 4. But they're not printed for the company. Once everybody in London knows that everybody's dead at the end of Romeo and Juliet, the last bit of cash you can make out of it is by selling it to a bookseller, probably over by St. Paul's, who prints it up, sells it on. But the company work for a handwritten script. So if you're playing Mercutio, just check I'm right. Yes, you're playing Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, that's what you get. Instead of a helpful little paperback, you get that. And a lot of you all know this. What do you get? Just your lines and your cue. Yeah, what we now rather brilliantly call a cue script. Why don't you get the whole play? There you go. Yep, you're going to, Hamlet. You're going to write it out 16 times by hand, not knowing if you're only going to do it once. If the audience hate it, you ain't going to do it more than once. So it's going to cost you a fortune. Takes too much time, costs too much. Other reasons why you don't give actors the whole play. Actors. I used to be an actor. I'm allowed to be. I'm not rude about actors. Then spoil it. Well, they take it over. Yeah, yeah. Plagiarism. Less important than it used to be, interestingly enough, apparently. 15 years ago, plagiarism, there's no copyright on non-printed material. This isn't printed. And that would have been a very big answer. I think it's less so now, because now we understand that the actors made good money out of it. The crime isn't worth it. Do you see what I mean? If you got caught selling it, you'd not be in the company anymore. You're better off being an actor in the company than selling it to a bookseller. I think there's another reason, and this gives modern actors cardiac arrest, which I love, is you don't need it. Why do you want to read the whole play? Well, Hamlet's out there talking to the audience about something about to be, or I missed the beginning, but it's not your problem. You're backstage having a cup of coffee. Modern actors like, oh my God, because you need to feel the whole thing and sort of ingest it. And write lists about what I say about my character and what other people say about my character and all that sort of stuff. And the Shakespearean actor's like, yeah, whatever. Get out there and do it. And again, the comparison with film is very interesting. You get a film script as a modern actor and you read the whole thing. Well, you're meant to. But then you tear out all the scenes you're not in, because there's no point in having carrying those around in your little man bag, because you're not going to be there when they're filmed. So there's no point in having them. So we sort of cue script it ourselves. But primarily the reason is money. It just costs too much. So if you're playing Mercutio, that is what you get of Romeo and Juliet. Instead of helpful little paperback, you get that, which, as you can see, I have not written out by hand. It would take too long, cost too much, etc., etc. Mercutio is a great part, agreed? 8.5 pages on this format. He dies halfway through. So by definition, it's not a big part. On this format, Romeo is 14 pages. Hamlet Quarto 2 is 35. You can get the scroll for Hamlet and do that, and it's somewhere the other side of Sky Harbor before it's finished unrolling. And you're given it like this in the form of a scroll. So if you're playing more than one part, you can stick them together, because you probably are. Cymbeline requires a cast of about 62. We think they had 16 or 18 actors. You can do the math. And some of you know this, especially if you've heard me before, but you're given it like that in the form of a scroll. So what's that? It's a cue script. Very good. And what am I doing to that cue script? I'm rolling it up. So what's that? Just do the last bit. Yeah, it's your role. It's the role of Mercutio. It's your role in the play. No one ever believes this. wave of cynicism crossing all your faces. It's Shakespeare. That's far too easy. It must be from Latin. If you roll up a piece of paper, it's a roll. Is it the whole play? So what is it? No, it's not the whole thing. It's your part. What part are you playing? I'm playing that part. It's where all these words come from. Do you see what I mean? And we spend so much time making Shakespeare complicated that everyone goes, oh, it can't be that easy. And normally at this point, I'd bring in something Jonathan did mention the other day, which is, this idea that just to get into the theatre, you put a penny in a box. So where are you going to keep the box? You'll keep the box in an office, won't you? And it'll be called a box office because you put the box in it. And all this stuff, and we go, oh, but it's Shakespeare. Let's talk about pentameters. So you're given it like this in the form of a scroll. And we would normally, I think, define a cue as the line before yours that tells you when to speak. But it's not, because that would take too long and cost too much to write out. So you get the last three words of the line before yours that tells you when to speak. We think. Now, if you know your Midsummer very well, you'll know that Shakespeare describes cues 3 times in it. Most fair Pyramus, 3 words, excellent. Deceiving me is Thisbe's cue. Oops, that's 2 words. Your cue is past. It is never tire. That's 2 words. So you get a 2 or a 3-word cue. We think. There is a fragment of cue script still in existence from the period, not by Shakespeare. And in that fragment, some of the cues are 1-word cues. I mean, not obviously and the. But, I think that way madness lies. So I work on 3. And we call it a cue for exactly that reason, because a cue comes from French, like so much of this stuff, and means tail. So what you're getting is you're getting the tail end of the line before yours. You're not getting the whole thing. So you can see it better on that Mercutio thing. On this is the first merchant in the Comedy of Errors. And if you're playing the first merchant in the Comedy of Errors, that is all you get of the Comedy of Errors. Instead of a helpful little paperback with notes and stuff, you get that. I'll bring this around so you can see it better. So you get your own lines and your cue. So my cue to come on, which I know from a chart backstage, which is called the plat, or as we would now call it, the plot of the play, that tells you where to come on, where to go off. I know I come on here, that's my cue to come on. That's my first speech. My first speech ends with the line, there is your money that I had to keep. And my next cue is dine with me. And when I hear dine with me, I say that. What do I not know about the 3 words dine with me? Who says them? Who they say them to? I have no reason to assume they'll say them to me. I think more importantly even than that, and those are quite important things, what happens in that gap? You have no idea. So I don't know if I say to you, there is your money that I had to keep, and you say, thanks, will you dine with me? Or if I say to you, there is your money that I had to keep, and you say, to be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is no in the mindset, and have a 75-line speech that ends in the 3 words, dine with me. Nor if I talk to you, talk to them, talk to them, talk to them, to them, blah, 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 and you say dine with me in 45 minutes' time to see that, because it's not in the script. Do you see what I mean? So all you know is you're on a 40-foot by 20-foot stage in front of 3,000 people doing a different play every afternoon, which you get a few days to learn and about 3 hours to rehearse, is that sooner or later someone will say something to somebody that's going to end in the 3 words, dine with me, at which point it's your turn to talk. This is not how modern actors work. And when I say you can't understand Shakespeare to understand this, most obvious point, he can't use the 3 words, dine with me, in that order at any point between there and there, no matter how long that is, because if he does, I'll start talking. Do you see that? Imagine it's Romeo and Juliet, and they're down the front doing the falling in love stuff. If I profane with my unworthiest hand, blah, blah, blah. And the audience is going, look, it's lovely, they're falling in love. And Romeo says to Juliet, I love you so much, I'd like you to come and dine with me. At which point the back door in the stage bursts open, and the first merchant's barreling down, saying, man, I've heard dine with me, I'm talking. And as you are not a bunch of young intellectual audience, I'm actually lying. He can use those 3 words. It's called multiple cueing. But he can only use them if he's trying to do a special effect, if he wants something else to happen. So my favourite example of this is a great moment in Merchant of Venice, where if you're playing Salerio, and you're looking at your cue script, your next cue is have my bond. So all you're waiting for is someone to say have my bond. And Shylock has a long speech, during the course of which he says have my bond 6 times. Every time he says it, Salerio thinks it's his cue, because he doesn't know it's not, because he hasn't got Shylock's lines. So Shylock goes, I'll have my bond. No, he's still talking. He's still talking. He's still talking. And eventually he says, I will have my bond, and walks off. And Salerio says something along the lines of, almost impossible to interrupt that guy, isn't it? Well, yes, it is, because he just cued you 6 times. So obviously the first thing to do with this really is see how easy this is. For which purpose? Oh my gosh, he's got paper. I need 4 volunteers. 4 volunteers. Lovely. 1, 2, 3, 4. Coming up. There will be plenty of volunteering options. Those of you who didn't volunteer, don't think you get out of it. No, you get a special one. Make sure I'm handing the right thing. Lovely, there you go. And it's very simple. I'm playing Mark Antony. Julius Caesar has been murdered. You're pretty cross about it. I'm playing Mark Antony. I'm trying to make you crosser. These are your ringleaders. If you look at your cue, cue script, it goes dot, 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 and there are 3 words in italics. Those words in italics are your cue. When you hear your cue, you say your line. It's that simple, okay? It's not rocket science there. He looks slightly like a firing squad. Okay, here we go. I tell you that which you yourselves do know. Show you sweet Caesar's wounds, poor dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus, and Brutus Antony, there were an Antony, would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny.
We'll mutiny! We'll burn the house of Brutus.
Away then, come seek the conspirators.
Yet hear me, countrymen, yet hear me speak.
Peace
ho, here Antony,
most noble
Antony.
Good, why friends, you get to do you know not what. Wherein has Caesar thus deserved your loves? Alas, you know not, I must tell you then. You forgot the will I told you of.
Most
Most
true
true
will, let's say and hear the will.
Here is the will, and under Caesar's seal to every Roman citizen he gives, to every several man, 75 drachmas.
Most noble Caesar will revenge his death.
O royal Caesar.
Yeah, hear me with patience.
Peace ho!
Moreover, he collected all his walks, his private arbours, and new planted orchards on this side Tiber. Let them you and your heirs forever, common pleasures, to walk abroad and recreate yourselves. Here was a Caesar, when comes such another.
Never, never come away, away. We'll burn his body in the holy place, and with the brands of fire the traitors' houses, take up the body.
Go fetch fire.
Pluck down benches.
Pluck down forms, windows, anything.
Very good. Very nice. Well done. Very nice. Just a few points about that.
You're going to critique our act?
Yeah, no. Well, yes, obviously. That is about 90 seconds of a 3.5 hour play. The level of concentration on your 4 faces for an absolute picture. You was like, ah. Now imagine playing Hamlet. Second thing, first plebeian, and I'm not critiquing your acting at all, there, but first cue, rise and mutiny. First line, will mutiny, will burn the house of Brutus. What didn't you know? You didn't know that everybody else was going to say will mutiny, nor did you know that they were only going to say will mutiny. And you do what everyone always does. This is critique. You don't know. Will mutiny! We'll burn the house of Brutus. Where the hell's everyone else gone? You have no idea which is crowd line and which is solo line. Your face when you got to your first solo line was like, where the hell did everyone else go? You haven't a clue. But my favourite bit, and this never fails, is what happens to the plebeians, because you were giving it some angry Roman mobbishness in a quite nice way. And you got to your last cue, which is the immortal peace, and me with patience, and your line, which is peace ho. And you all go for it. And I went, hear me with patience, and you went, peace ho, great. Every one of you dropped the script back down to your lap after you started taking notes on my experience with the cue scripts. Because the scene had finished. But the scene hadn't finished. You just didn't have any more lines in it. We were still going. Imagine that on stage. There's the five of us acting our socks off, and the entire crowd getting up, peace, all right, pub. And it's a really obvious point. You can't stop listening. But modern actors don't have to listen because of how long we rehearse for, etc., etc., etc. But working like this, you do, because that was good, what you did there. I'm not critiquing it at all. But basically, it was a play reading, wasn't it? You stood in a line and you got the lines in the right order. Well, whoop. I would suggest, you don't fork out $18 million to go and see Hamilton going, I really hope they get the lines in the right order. It's sort of base camp, really, isn't it? So you've got to turn this into drama. And this, I think, is where it gets interesting, because I'm not suggesting we work like this. I have done work like this, and it's terrifying. But I don't think it's very interesting for an audience. But what it tells you about Shakespeare, because what you've got to do is you've got to make this drama. You've got to make this so the audience want to come back tomorrow and the next day and the next day, so you can buy most of Stratford. But you don't have rehearsal, really. You don't have a director. That role doesn't exist for another 250 years. So how do you do it? Well, listening, I would argue, is step one. So you're listening for, obviously, cues. What else are you listening for? What else might someone say that's going to affect what you do? Yeah? Facial expression? Addressed to a crowd, yeah. What else might someone say just specifically from your point of view? Just stand up for me, Erin. Would you just stand up, lovely? And now sit down. Now, don't listen to me for the next 15 seconds, okay? Stand up. Play stopped. Actor not listening. People tell you what to do on stage. We talked about this a bit on Wednesday, those of you who are here. Stage direction that you read in Shakespeare, almost unilaterally not written by Shakespeare, unless it's enter or exit, which might be. Everything else is conjecture. He tends to put it in the script, because that way it'll happen. People tell you what to do. Stand up, sit down, bring my book to me here in the orchard, lie in my tent and sleep, die, helpful hints like that. If you're playing Romeo and someone puts a sword into you and says die, unless your next line is no, you die, it's a pretty safe bet to hit the deck. So Shakespeare's telling you what to do. And even using stage direction, he can change character because he's clever like that. So you're listening for that, and you're listening for your cue. I think there's one other thing you're listening for, and this is where it gets ugly. Stage direction tells you what to do, doesn't it? Stand up, sit down. What if someone describes what you're doing? If someone describes what you're doing, by definition, that description is in their script, but not in yours. So you don't know that you're doing it until they describe you as doing it, by which point you're meant to be doing it. Do you see that? This is how fast they have to work. Another quick volunteer. Let's have another volunteer. Someone, quick. Yep, lovely. Thank you very much. So Friar Lawrence in Romeo and Juliet, elderly priest, Paris's page. I love this. Very good. Look at the character already. God, you've actually very nearly just took away everything I was going to do there. That's very good. We walk on stage and you don't know what I'm going to say because this is not even a cue in his script. So we walk on stage and I say, here is a friar that trembles, sighs and weeps. Very good. Very nice. You may sit down. The point being, of course, that Lawrence doesn't know that Lawrence is trembling or sighing or weeping until I tell him. So in the time it takes 3,000 people to stop looking at me and look at you, you've got to be trembling and sighing and weeping. Because if you've seen your mates in the audience and you're going, and I'm going, here's the friar that trembles, so you're going to be unemployed by 3 o'clock for being rubbish. And it brings me really to the point of what these plays are. Because, we're all taught and we write long learned papers about what it all means and all that stuff, all of which is fine, because Shakespeare's a genius and he'll take all that. And, we can talk about Ovid and we can talk about all this stuff, which is absolutely true and absolutely valuable. But in terms of putting the plays on, what these plays are is they are a blueprint for performance. They're there to tell the actor how to do it. And if you know what you're looking for in a Shakespeare script, I'm out of a job, because you don't need a director. You've got one. He just happened to die in April 1616, because Shakespeare directs it by how he writes it. Now, this is a sort of 3-day workshop that I'm going to condense to the next 4 minutes to leave time for questions. But it's things like, why am I speaking prose, not verse? Why am I speaking verse, not prose? More importantly, why do I choose this moment to change from one to the other? Doesn't matter which way it goes. If I'm speaking verse, where do my sentences end? Middle of a line, end of a line, why? Why do I have this number of syllables in a line, not that number? Why do we have this number of lines we were talking about yesterday? Everything is there to tell you an actor something, because otherwise it's not going to happen. And it's extraordinary how, I don't read music, but I imagine it's like being able to read music. You look at it and you go, oh, it goes, and you know how it works. You can do the same with Shakespeare. And the questions it throws up are always absolutely fascinating. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. Have any of you done Twelfth Night? My favourite example is Twelfth Night. Were you in it or did you teach it? Cool. And were you in it or taught it? Great. So if only you don't know the play, the lead character is a woman called Olivia, who's a countess. At the beginning of the play, her brother's just died and she's taken a vow. For 7 years, she's just going to mourn her dead brother. Nothing else. No love, no life, nothing. Just mourning dead brother. There's an aristocrat in love with her called Orsina who keeps sending messengers to her saying, love me, love me, love me. And she keeps sending them back saying, mourning dead brother, push off. Aristocrat gets a new messenger, this being Shakespeare. It's a girl dressed as a boy and nobody notices. And Olivia promptly falls in love with the messenger. Okay, if you're playing Olivia, how do you know the moment you fall in love? Well, other writers of the period, and I am not joking, would put in a stage direction, brackets, she falls in love, close brackets. Shakespeare being Shakespeare, it's rather more subtle. Halfway through the scene, Olivia's language changes. She stops talking to this boy in prose, and she starts speaking to him in verse. Well, as a general rule, and it's a really good one, prose comes from here, and verse, the iambic pentameter, goes dee-dum, 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 dee-dum. It's a heartbeat. So halfway through the scene, she stops speaking from the head and starts speaking from the heart. Big enough for and most actors are going to get that. But I think what's really interesting is her first line of verse. And she says to this boy, your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him. Simple, huh? That's what she's been saying all along. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him. Well, no, it's not, actually. Because how many syllables does an iambic pentameter have? How many syllables does your Lord doth know my mind, I cannot love him have? And the answer before you're frantically, well, very good. There we are, 11. So an 11-syllable line, as you may know, is known as, God help us, a feminine ending, a phrase I never want to use again, because the final syllable is unstressed, so it's weak like a girl. And so it shows that Olivia's falling in love, which is sort of girly and weak. Except, really, does Shakespeare think that? I don't think so. I mean, if you think about the women in Shakespeare, they are always unilaterally more emotionally advanced, better than the men. Shakespeare doesn't think women are weak. He thinks they're better than men. I think, people go, oh, yeah, patriarchal society, you see. Well, it's a patriarchal society run by this guy called Elizabeth. But so I always think that with an 11-syllable line, the first thing to do is turn it back into a 10-syllable line. So how do you do that? Well, if you've got 11 bananas and you want 10 bananas, you take away a banana, don't you? So let's take away a syllable. Which one should we take away? Well, you'll take away the last one, because that's the one that makes it 11. And you're left with, your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love. Which is what she's been saying all along. I've taken a vow, I'm not allowed to fall in love. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love. Enter really cute boy. Your Lord does know my mind, I cannot love him. And the him is everything you need to know about the goalpost shifting. It's not I can't love anymore. It's I can't love Orsino, but who are you? The extra syllable tells you what's happening. What's the most famous line in Shakespeare? To be or not to be, that is the question. 11 syllables. So it's either Hamlet dithering and becoming weak like a girl, or more interestingly, what does Hamlet have to be? We were talking about this, or Jonathan was talking about this in his talk yesterday. He's a Wittenberg University intellectual who's got to become a revenge hero. If you're a revenge hero, you're looking for justice, you're looking for vengeance, you're looking for blood, what do you go on? You go on a quest. To be or not to be, that is the quest. There you are, perfect iambic pentameter. Hamlet can't say it. He has to say to be or not to be, that is the quest. Yun. If you can't say the word quest without making it into a question in a character that has 64% more questions than any other character in Shakespeare, in a play that opens with a question, who's there, I would argue you've nailed the part of Hamlet. It's Shakespeare's advice to Burbage on what he's doing. And the joy of this is that, it just opens it up, that it's not about Shakespeare being a poet. It's about Shakespeare being a director. And Shakespeare going to the actors, this is how you do it, because you've only got 3 hours, most of which we're going to spend dancing and fighting. So I need to tell you how to play it. And once you start looking at it like this, you spot whole loads of different things. And it becomes much more available because you're up and doing it, going, okay, I'm playing this off you, I'm playing this off you, I'm playing this. But what am I doing? How am I playing it? Well, the script will tell you. And I want to leave a bit of time for questions. So looking out for the clues in the script, looking out for those moments where the character changes. We just did the bit from Julius Caesar with Mark Antony. So Brutus speaks first and convinces the crowd completely. And then Mark Antony speaks and the crowd volte-face and decide they went with Mark Antony. Why? Well, rule 1, Brutus speaks to the crowd in prose and Mark Antony speaks to them in verse. If you want a rabble-rouse, you do not appeal to the intellect, you appeal to the gut. The moment Mark Antony says, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, Brutus is finished. Because Mark Antony is appealing to that, not to, I think it's interesting, I think the fiscal deficit has become such, Julius Caesar, no one cares. We just want to know about the fact that, I killed him and these did that. It changes it, and there are some fascinating moments in the plays where you start going, oh, hello. Because, we're rather like the copyright thing, we sort of lost the idea that the upper classes speak verse and the lower classes speak prose, because that doesn't hold water. And you then start looking at who has what and why. So in As You Like It, and the answer to why is going to depend on your production, because we can't ask Shakespeare. But in As You Like It, Rosalind has love scenes with Orlando, who she is in love with, and love scenes are clearly going to be that, aren't they? Except they're not. They're all in prose. So as a director and as an actor, you've got to look at that and go, well, hang on, you've got love scenes in prose. Why? Why that? At the end, in Much Ado About Nothing, which we talked about a bit on Wednesday, Beatrice and Benedict, when they respond to being conned into loving each other, Beatrice, for the first time in the play, goes into verse. Dear Lord, she's talked. But she's talked in prose. But the moment she falls in love, she's there. And so obviously Benedict, the moment he's conned into falling in love, goes firmly and stays in prose. He doesn't go into verse at all. So they're not the same character. They're not a mirror image of each other. They're different because their response is different. You've got to work out what that means for the play. But it's Shakespeare's way of telling you that there's something going on. Do you see what I mean? That it's not just as easy as, oh, we're in love now. Well, you've got time. If you think about what Shakespeare does in that long speech, he goes through, reasons for loving Beatrice, reasons for staying single, final score, loving Beatrice 5, staying single 4, I'll fall in love with Beatrice. You can call me an unreconstructed romantic, if you will, but I would argue you tend not to fall in love from an Excel spreadsheet. And whereas Beatrice just goes blam and reconnects with her heart. These are character notes. And it's Shakespeare telling you something about the character you're playing and the words that are happening. Erin and I were talking yesterday about Taming the Shrew, and that speech at the end. Everyone goes, "God, it's such a long speech about how men are better than women," and it's really difficult. Such a long speech. Well, it's such a long speech. Why does she do that then? Why does she decide to talk for 37 lines? Why not just say, "What duty do women owe men? Everything." That would cover it. You'd win the bet. But she has 37 lines, and it just goes on and on. Something else is going on. Do you know what I mean? You don't have 37 lines if you're brutalized by this misogynist swine. You have 37 lines if you're playing some form of game. And you've got to work out what that game is, I think. And it's just looking for these clues and allowing actors and students to get up and go, well, I think it could be this. Because they're always going to come up with something. And I'll leave it with it because it's my favourite student moment, and then you can ask me questions. I was doing 12th Night in As You Like It in Memphis some years back, and a sort of pro-am thing. So some students from Rhodes College and some professional Memphis actors. And a very young actress, student actress called Madison, was playing Celia. And she was doing one of those endless scenes where Celia's waiting with Rosalind for Orlando to show up because he's always late. And she was playing it like Strindberg. And I was like, and eventually I said, yeah, Madison, I don't don't want to intrude on this, but, this is normally played sort of as like banter with your cousin who you love, rather than, we're all going to die sort of thing, which is like, playing gloomy as hell. And she said, that's interesting, Nick, because there's nothing in my script that says jokingly. And you go, so, oh, hello. And so I went, no, I'm a really good director, so I go, you do that directy thing. No, you're right, Madison. It doesn't say jokingly. You say, well, we'll try it your way, and then we'll try it my way, and we'll see which works best, with that sort of patronizing undercurrent of, and then you'll see why I'm right. And so we did it her way first, and it's totally transformed my view of the play. Clearly right, clearly much, much more interesting than anything I was suggesting. And we had to go back and redirect the whole thing, because you're saying, oh my God, it doesn't say jokingly. And the student just goes, well, I think it could be this. And you get, no, I don't. Oh, perhaps it could. And I love that. I mean, I knew here on Wednesday, and Jonathan and I have been talking about this since, when Jonathan said, you can't do the ambiguity of the end of Measure for Measure. And I went, I think you can. And it's like, oh, perhaps you talk about that, because there's so much available in these plays. And so much, because you can show what Shakespeare wanted, but Peter Hall says this, and then I promise I'll ask a question. Peter Hall, who founded the RSC and the National, who was my hero, in a very good book called Shakespeare's Advice to the Players, says, Shakespeare tells you exactly and precisely how to tell every line, how to say every line. He never tells you why. And I find that's why I do it. That's why I go on doing these plays, because the why is what's interesting. I can read Shakespeare now, but I don't know what he wants. You can go, he wants that. Why isn't there a pause there? Why is there a pause there? Why is it prose? Why is it verse? Your why is going to be different to my why. And that's the joy of the discovery. But Shakespeare's written it to tell you how to do it. Because otherwise the actors won't get it right. And if the actors don't get it right, you won't make a whole heap of money.